As I think you all know now, as Keith mentioned, we have really shortened the format of these webinars and are running them weekly in response to the pandemic crisis that we're all sadly now used to living with and struggling with. And our intention with these webinars is really to introduce you to some thinking and work of our faculty at MIT that we hope will help you deal with the challenges that you're facing now and also emerge from this current crisis all the stronger for it. Our catchword of innovation at work is really germane to that. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Renee Richardson Gosline, who is senior lecturer at the MIT Sloan School and also a principal research scientist in the MIT Initiative on the Digital Economy. And today, Renee is going to talk to us about her work and research on delivering breakthrough customer experience in times of great change. So welcome, Renee. As you can see from this slide, she's incredibly accomplished and respected in her field and has been very generous to spend this time with us today. And we'll be covering questions like, how do we apply behavioral science to thinking about the customer experience and the customer journey? How do we design a strategy around that? And she'll spend some time thinking about the current crisis and what the impacts of that are and the opportunities of these ideas as well. And so, as you can see, Renee teaches in executive education programs. Here are some examples, just a few, of her recent research papers. And about to be hot off the presses, please keep an eye out for her upcoming book, The Human Algorithm, really all about where humans meet AI and digital, and we're really looking forward to that. But we're going to get a little preview, I hope, of that in the coming minutes. Renee is going to give a short presentation, and then we'll stick around for some questions. Please feel free to ask questions as the talk goes on. I'll be keeping an eye on those, and we'll hopefully be able to synthesize and put a few of those to Renee towards the end of this half hour. With that, I'd like to hand over to Renee and welcome her to this stage.
All right, thank you, Peter. And thank you everyone for joining. I saw folks from near and from far. It's really an honor to have you here. I saw some familiar names, even some former students. So it's very, very great to see you all. I want to start today to talk about the Behavioral Science Foundation, which is the lens that I use when I look at customer experience phenomena. And you may or may not be familiar with this body of research, so I'm going to give you a quick primer. Now imagine you're driving down a road, it's the night, and you're in a sort of rural area like this, and out pops in front of you this animal. What do? Now, most of you will probably say, I'd mash the brakes. And perhaps some of you would say, well, I'd measure the velocity and perhaps the mass of the animal and the road conditions. But in the moment, you would make a quick choice. Now, if I were to ask you then at a dinner with some clients, what kind of wine would you choose if you were to look at a wine list like this? You might consider the origin of the grape, the varietal, the price, whether or not you've had the wine before. You may seek information from others, the waiter, perhaps others at your table. You may think about what you could signal with your choice as to your preferences for price and the like. But what would differ in these two choices is the kind of cognitive systems that you would employ. And so you have in your mind, in your brain, a system one, thinking fast process, which allows you to mash the brakes quickly in front of the deer. And you also have a system two, slower, more deliberative process that you would use to decide which wine to choose. And it's amazing and wonderful that we have these two processes because it allows us to make choices in an efficient manner when need be, but also to take into account lots of other things like associations we have with brands or cognitive memories that may impact our choice. Now, you may be familiar with this if you've read the book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. And so this is typical of how behavioral economic or behavioral scientist researchers think about human decision making. that we have these two systems, and it's wonderful that our brains work this way. However, though these systems are well equipped to help us make decisions, we have to be mindful of cognitive biases and how they affect our decisions. So the great thing is you could read this sentence that I've just put, even though it has 3 typos in it. The thing that, however, makes it difficult for us to manage when we're trying to make the best choice is that the very thing that you use to make these, to read this sentence, the fact that you've seen the words mindful, affect, and decisions before, the fact that you can draw on things from your past and quickly make judgments, are the very things that lead to cognitive biases. And those are the things that, as behavioral economists or behavioral scientists, we try to think about. So given uncertainty then and anxiety, which is a pretty good description of this time we're in, it's important that we nudge people in a customer experience toward optimal decisions. It's important that we help people reduce their cognitive biases and their knee-jerk reactions if they're going to lead to suboptimal choice. I'll give you an example then of this in action. Now, here we have a citation from New York City, and this is for a nonviolent offense, like being in a park after hours or drinking in public. And most of the people who receive these are nonviolent offenders and first-time offenders, more importantly. Now, in New York City, when you receive one of these, and I'm assuming none of you has received one, but if you have, that's okay. Your next job is to fill this out and then plea at the court. The problem that New York City courts had, however, is that there were far too many people not responding. And this led to things being ratcheted up where warrants were being issued, which is very expensive for courts, and frankly, not something you want to have happen if this is something you want to dispense with quickly. And so a firm called Ideas 42, with which I've become recently affiliated, employed nudging to redesign the ticket so that at the top, criminal court appearance makes it clear what this piece of paper is, so that your next steps are more obvious, so that you have a website and an SMS text line to get more information, and so that the implications of not responding are made clear. And just this small redesign, which is low expense, led to the redesign and the SMS, a reduction in failures to appear of 36%. That's a tremendous amount of money and labor saved, and also a tremendous amount of embarrassment for people who don't want a bad night to lead to a warrant. So when we think about this, I want you to think about, and in this sort of amuse-bouche of the executive education course I teach, rethinking customer experience. Take the journey of the customer and unpack it, deconstruct it as a series of linked touch points at which you or your customers need to make decisions. And those decisions are mediated by technology. So the human is acting as well as being augmented, ideally, by technology at these various touch points. Too often we think of the customer journey as merely being the sum. Have they adopted? Yes or no? But in this approach, from a behavioral standpoint, when you deconstruct the journey, you can start to think about nudge opportunities. And this is important, and particularly the mediation with technology, because there's a sort of false dichotomy that people often talk about, human versus AI, man versus machine. But in reality, we outsource choices and judgments to machines and algorithms all the time. Our GPSs, our dating search profiles, and even our traffic lights do this work for us. So what I do with my research is I examine human-centered AI systems and when human intelligence can augment AI and vice versa. Because we've not only just evolved from Homo sapiens to Homo economicus, which is discussed in the field of economics as the utility or rational utility maximizing actor. We've evolved into a sort of Homo technologicus, where we nimbly go between human decision-making and algorithmic input. And so some of the research I do looks at who's more likely to embrace this AI input. We know, for instance, that some people display algorithmic aversion. For example, in experiments, when people were asked to choose between an algorithm or a physician's advice as to whether or not they should have an operation, people exhibited algorithmic aversion. That is, they preferred to follow the advice and the input of the human. And this research showed because if there were something to go awry, it's easier to blame a human than it is to blame an algorithm. But other research has shown that people can exhibit algorithmic appreciation. That is, prefer the input of algorithms over the input of humans. In a task, for example, where people were asked to look at a picture of a man and estimate his weight from the picture, people were more likely to adopt the input of the algorithm than they were of other humans. What explains these differences? Well, my research looks at who is more likely to do one or the other. And what we show is that these systems, system 1 and system 2, are predictive of whether humans are going to be algorithmically averse or algorithmically appreciative. And that people who tend to be system 2, more deliberative thinkers, more reflective thinkers, are more likely to be algorithmically appreciative. Now, this is really important because these system 2 dominant thinkers tend to be less impulsive and tend to engage in reward deferment, which is correlated with higher levels of success, being able to think about and pursue long-term goals. So, what does this mean for this crucible moment that we're in? We have a pandemic, and we have sources of information coming from different directions, and algorithms that are helping us screen. We have facial recognition technologies. And in the case of the bottom picture here, a pixelated picture of Barack Obama was upscaled to be a completely different race. We have algorithms and machine learning where if you can see in this company, you can put in the name and the service predicts whether the name you've put in is female or male. Here it says Megan Smith is 60% chance of female. But when you put in Dr. Megan Smith, the machine learning algorithm says now it's got an almost 76% chance of being male. These kinds of machine learning biases are really important for us to assess in this time. So how do we respond to this crucible moment? Well, here's not to do. I thought this tweet was actually quite interesting because I'm sure you've seen this sort of template that many brands have used where we at brand are committed to being there for you during the pandemic or fighting racial injustice. And we hope this encourages you to view fill-in brand positively without, expecting anything of us. Well, although this is funny, the fact is that customers and people are expecting more of us. So if this is not the response, what should we do? I'd like you to consider this framework, an exit framework for breakthrough customer experience. And this is different in that it's characterized by equity in the exchanges. So we've got 5 types of value or capital that we want to provide our customers so that they can feel like the exchange is more equitable: economic, cultural, social, informational, and temporal. So let me give you some examples of folks who are doing this and getting it right. In terms of economic capital, that's incentive-based empowerment. That's giving people a financial incentive so that they can get through this time and also being equitable in pay. We see Nike making a $40 million donation, for example, to organizations dedicated to fighting racial injustice, and Glossier, the cosmetic startup, donating $500,000 to organizations like that. Economic capital, putting your money where your mouth is. But there's more. Cultural capital. We see brands like Ben & Jerry's and the Chobani yogurt have really made the brand have an experience around the expression of empowerment of all people, and that this is part of a lifestyle where they take care of their customers, where they donate foods, they support first responders, they make statements and engage in support for organizations that fight racial injustice. We also see, for example, Singapore Airlines, a brand that is associated with luxury, that has then taken its staff, which can no longer be in the air, the flight attendants, and has brought them to hospitals where people are experiencing COVID and given them the experience of being in the air on Singapore Air while they're in their hospital beds. This is sharing an experience that's difficult to replicate. Social capital. We see IBM in a B2B setting declining in the use of facial recognition technologies and selling these to police departments. And that then using their social capital within B2B to lead the way that then led other companies like Microsoft and Amazon to cease that behavior as well. We also see the platform Twitter using their initiative called Twitter Blackbirds, where they take tweets that really speak evocatively to the moment, in particular the fight for racial equality, and have actually posted out-of-home billboards featuring these users' posts, giving these users social network prominence that feels amazing and is difficult to replicate and far above giving people a coupon code. Information capital. We see the Children's Television Network workshop, the makers of Sesame Street, having town halls for children and special programming to assist parents who may have a difficult time talking about why their children are at home or talking about racial injustice, and bringing it down to their level while using beloved characters like Elmo and Cookie Monster, helping parents make better decisions and having agency, and doing so in a way that's transparent and allows families to discover something and be inspired in the moment. We also saw TikTok just yesterday, the social networking platform, say that it's going to embrace complete transparency and share its algorithm publicly to allay any concerns about malfeasance, but also to set the bar for other social media platforms to do the same. Information capital, allowing people to make better decisions and being more transparent. And last but not least, value in the form of time. We see Apple, for instance, in creating a shortcut where if people are pulled over by police officers, they can use this shortcut to start filming, to turn off their Touch ID, and to send a message. We also see in the time of COVID, Domino's Pizza really being an early adopter and an innovator of contactless delivery, where you can not only watch where your pizza is in the journey, but also engage in behaviors that are nourishing, but not risky, something that's very important to people at this time. And for temporal capital, you're receiving value in more time, safety in the form of contactless, and the fact that the brand is engaging in timely action. So we see this exit framework being employed to provide real value in both B2B and B2C contexts. And we see that this is more than just platitudes or posting a black box or running an ad with soft piano music saying, in the pandemic, we're all in this together. So this is a time of reflection for us all. And in the midst of chaos, it may seem like it is the worst possible time to reflect. And in the midst of chaos, it may seem like it's the worst possible time to innovate. We should wait for the dust to settle and tread water. Well, I'm here to suggest that that's the opposite of what firms need to be doing when it comes to delivering value to their customers in their experiences. Customers need and want more, and we should give it to them because it's good business and it's the right thing to do. And we will find that firms that have been able to really rally resources in a way that provides value will be positioned in the longer term to maintain and hold loyalty. So I want to leave you with a few thoughts and then we'll open it up for questions. As crises compound, Now is the time where we need to be crystal clear about who we are. What is our purpose? And how are we innovating in a way that is aligned with that? Because doing things the way they've always been done no longer works. It's not enough. So getting clear about what your North Star is will help you to develop customer experiences that are both consistent with who you want to be and to attract the customers that want to be with you. Brand experiences or customer experiences have to share value and not feel exploitative. Customers have bristled at the notion amongst the pandemic of people wanting to sell them more stuff, for example. And using the power of nudging, which is a tremendously effective means of changing behavior, needs to be done so with ethics in mind, nudging for good. So we know that tweets about solidarity are nice, but people are doing their research. Customers are empowered, and they're home, and they're online, and they are doing the background work. And so if there is a symbiosis between your profit centers and things like inequality, for example, it is the time now to reflect on that and think about how you can restructure in a way that really is aligned with the values that you espouse and really sharing value with your customers. With regard to technology, AI, machine learning, respect the human beings behind the data. Big data is wonderful, but each data point represents a person, and each person has a perspective that should be listened to. So there are many ways that we can listen to our customers. We can scrape data from social media platforms. We can contact them in a variety of ways, but overall, part of your DNA needs to be ethics, right? At Sloan, we don't want to talk about ethics being kind of a separate course. It should be integrated in all of our courses, just like innovation is, for example. So expand, empower your leadership team. In the case of racial equality, include Black perspectives. We've seen the sort of penalty or the danger when you don't and you attempt to communicate something that falls flat. As in the case, for instance, recently of Snap, which had on Juneteenth a filter that asked consumers to smile in order to break chains. And hold your investors and your partners accountable. And get comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's a hallmark of experimentation, and that's even more important now. No change comes without discomfort, but that discomfort is well worth it for us to move to a place where we're all sharing in the value and where your firms have stronger relationships with their customers. So I'm going to stop here and open it up for questions if there are any.
Great, thank you, Renee. And we've been getting a lot of questions coming in. I'll do my best to synthesize a few of them. One theme that seems interesting here is, I think a lot of people's expectations when we talk about customer experience would be the aspects of customer experience about, you know, how smooth the transaction is, whether if I'm ordering online, whether my goods come in the 2-hour window when they were promised, and those kinds of things. And it seems like you're saying, really, that's now table stakes. And there's a much deeper level of connection with customers, perhaps not only the ones that you're literally transacting with, but also the ones that are just aware of you, that are going to affect your social contract, in a sense, your ability to even be in business. Is that really what you're saying?
That's spot on. I think we need to think about it in terms of what are called POPs and PODs. POPs are points of parity. PODs are points of differentiation. POPs are your sort of price of entry. And in a time of COVID, contactless or having a digital platform, or 10 years ago, a Facebook page, that was a point of parity. And sure, some may have gotten there sooner than others, but it's not a long-term competitive advantage if it's easily replicated. So what you've got to think about is, sure, these are nuts and bolts for transacting during this time, and that's important to get up to speed. But when it comes to customer experience, there's much more than that. And customers expect much more. It's not enough to say, oh, I can order online. That no longer is a differentiating factor.
Great, thank you, that helps. There have been some questions as well about, you touched on this question of biases in the technology itself. And to what extent is that really undermining fundamental trust in any of these systems? And what is it that we need to all be doing in our businesses to address that question? We may be just renting this technology right from the tech companies. We're not developing it ourselves. So what do we do in the face of that challenge?
Well, it's a big challenge. And as you are aware, there are big tech companies testifying as we speak. I think it's essential for us to prioritize and really demand as customers and as firms that those kinds of biases be rooted out. We are finding that there are outsized effects of these biases that ultimately affect us all. For instance, recently, a machine learning algorithm decided admissions to colleges, and also decided for an international baccalaureate grades. So who got a grade, who passed, who did not. I don't know about you, but I'm not sure I feel comfortable being assessed in that way. And what the implications are, because the machine learning or the algorithm is only as good as what rules are being programmed. I mean, there's a phrase where people say garbage in, garbage out. So if you put poor data or data that is not representative of a wide group of people in, then you're going to have a problematic model. I showed an example of the machine learning algorithm that took the heavily pixelated picture of Barack Obama and turned him into a completely different race, because the machine learning algorithm is running all these sort of tests. But ultimately, somebody set those rules. And, you know, that's a sort of silly, perhaps not important example, but it becomes pretty important when we're talking about, for instance, facial recognition technologies and who could be jailed. Or when we're talking about, as some recent research has attempted to do, predicting criminal behavior and creating profiles based on machine learning. So I think it's imperative and crucial that we demand more transparency, and that we demand that the architects of these machine learning programs come from diverse backgrounds, so that there is representation of different sorts of people to reduce the likelihood that their needs and their perspectives and interests will be omitted, and we'll find ourselves trying to get the horse back in the barn.
Great, thank you. This has been fascinating, and as always happens, time is flying by. Perhaps we have time for one very quick last question. You've said actually for quite some time we should all get comfortable being uncomfortable. In perhaps a sentence or two, what would you advise us all to do to get better at being uncomfortable?
Great question. Couple things. Research and read. There are great books that can help you get up to speed. Second thing, have frank conversations with people in your networks. And the third thing, practice improv. It actually limbers you up to feel foolish, which will then make you comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Great, thank you. That's great advice. And I feel on these webinars like I'm practicing improv every time. So hopefully it's helping me too. Thank you so much, Renee Gosline. This has been really fascinating and very useful. And thank you all of you who from around the world who joined us for this discussion. As we mentioned at the beginning, there were many questions that we didn't get to, but we will follow up with a blog article, which hopefully gets to some of those questions as well. And we have coming up on August the 6th, the next in our Innovation at Work webinar series on thinking about the transformational role of chief learning officers. And you don't need to be a CLO for this to be of interest and value to you. This is about the transformational challenges that we all face as we have to learn how to thrive in this new world, as we were just hearing about from my colleague Renee Gosline. So thank you all. Thank you, Renee. This was fantastic. We'll look forward to seeing everyone again soon. Be safe and keep on innovating.
Thank you.